Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of the Musician's Mentor podcast. I'm your host, Travis Mark, and today I have the distinct pleasure of talking with my good friend, Chris Finney. Chris is a producer, an engineer, a business owner, a lecturer, and a visual arts editor who has won multiple Grammy Awards. He's worked with artists like B.B King, Robert Plant, R.E.M., Dr. John, Harry Connick Jr., and the list goes on and on and on. I found this interview to be super insightful. I hope you do too. And if you do, please do me a favor, leave us a rating or review as per usual. But without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, the one, the only, Chris Finney. Chris Finney, thank you so very much for giving me some of your time, man. We're going to talk about all things music related, but we'll see where it goes, really. What I'm going to do is I'm going to do the same thing I do with everybody. What I would like for you to do, if you don't mind and if it's not too awkward, would you just give us a brief introduction as to who Chris Finney is? Tell us some of the things you've done. Tell us what you're currently up to. Maybe mention one or two of your achievements in there. And at least that way, from a listener's perspective, they can kind of understand where you're coming from, please.
Sure. Well, first off, thanks for having me. I'm a fan, so I was stoked to get invited.
Awesome.
But so I'm Chris Finney, born and raised in New Orleans. I've been making records for about 30 years. I have been an educator nearly as long, probably 25-ish years. I have pretty much at this point touched every type of audio engineering there is. I'm a musician as well, but as with a lot of producers and engineers, I'm not as successful as a musician as I wanted to be. So I found my niche in the studio on the other side of the glass and a little more comfortable there, and got started, I guess around high school. We recorded a demo with our band to get a gig or something, and I was kind of more enamored with the process of recording than with the process of playing, and just kind of always had a technical mind, and so that whole world kind of appealed to me. And then when I attempted to go to college, I had the grace to be under the influence of the great Ellis Marsalis, who, after a few attempts at making me a musician, he pulled me to the side and he said, "Hey, look, maybe your appropriateness in the music business is not as a musician, but yet in the business itself, as an engineer or a producer." He said, "You make a contribution with your microphones on the way that a musician makes a contribution with their instrument." And so I kind of ran with that and dropped out of school and went on the road with a band, and then decided that I loved being in the studio more than anything, and spent a lot of time in the studio, always searching for that one artist that I could just kind of give my fealty to. And so for a long time, that was Dr. John, the great New Orleans artist. And I, had some great years with him. Did some great records with Harry Connick Jr., with a band called the Revivalists. There's a few up in there that were pretty good. Ran my own studio for a long time, learned how to make all those mistakes as a businessman. And then I think I won a couple of Grammys along the way, and kind of just...
Oh, yeah, you did.
And then, so that happened. And then, just kind of have eased into the education thing, which kind of came out of a conversation I was having with some of my young high school friends and students that I was in the studio with, and asked them about, "Hey, what are you guys doing for a contract, and how are you doing this?" And they looked at me and said, "Oh no, we don't do contracts. That's how you get screwed." And I kind of realized in that moment that I was going to take a whole generation of educating young New Orleans musicians to assume that you do use a contract rather than assume that you don't use a contract, and things like that. And so my first class of students apparently they took it to heart because a few of them included, Chris Royal and Trombone Shorty and Jonathan Baptiste, and those guys have turned out to have pretty decent careers. So I think, I think it's, I count that as one of my successes in the sense that, I feel like I kind of got through to those guys, and now I think there's more of an assumption that you're going to operate on a professional level when you're in New Orleans than an assumption that you won't, which is, something that we were up against. And so I became a dad during the pandemic. And so that's pretty amazing. By far the coolest job I've ever had and the most exhausting. But and that's about it. I still make records, but I've got the benefit now of only working on stuff that I'm passionate about. And I don't I find that that's much more inspiring way to work. And I have kicked myself many times in the past couple of years for like, why didn't you do this sooner? Why did you work on so many records just to make a living? But the answer to that, you got to make a living. So, just kind of taking my lessons as I go, and hopefully the next record I do is better than the last. And as long as I can keep doing that, I'll be satisfied with the work I'm doing.
That's incredible. And there's so many things that I want to take away from that, but I think I'm going to kind of circle back.
Sure.
Because you mentioned a few things there that I just love, words like business, words like education. I know that it seems very tongue-in-cheek, but, you and I have had a couple of discussions, and I find that some of those things seem to be so overlooked when it comes to be sort of being a musician or an entertainer. It's like it all becomes about the music, man, which is, I'm down with that,
Totally.
but it's one of the reasons why, some people end up in the situations they're in. So we're going to come back to that, but I want to sort of first touch on, so you were playing music before you started focusing on audio. What instrument were you playing?
So I started playing, I guess around 9 or so. My dad had like this nylon string guitar in his closet, and I discovered it and, would bang around on it. My little brother did too. My little brother's 3 years younger than me. And so he also kind of was in the same boat with just banging around on the instrument, not really knowing what we're doing. And so at some point they offered, guitar classes to school kids. And it was like this group of, it's like 30 school kids banging away on an E chord or whatever in a classroom. And so I started doing that, but I also felt like, no, this isn't really getting me anywhere. I'm not, it didn't satisfy that craving in me. And then I think around 12 or 13, there may have been a girl in a piano class that I wanted to get next to. And so I volunteered to take piano lessons. And, piano is a little bit, for me at least, piano was like studying Latin, where it was kind of laborious and like, very kind of technical. And, I love playing piano. It's still, I consider it my first instrument really. But it felt like a language that I would never speak. Yet it was a language that would inform all of my other instruments, in the way that Latin informs a lot of other languages. And so when I got to high school, a lot of guys were starting bands, and, this was pre-grunge. So it was still kind of cool to be in a hair metal kind of band. And
Cool.
So, it was tongue in cheek, and it wasn't so serious, like it was at post-grunge. And so I started to play with guys in bands, playing guitar and stuff like that. And my dad suggested that I play bass because there weren't a lot of bass players. And something weird happened. I don't even know how I got my first instrument, but I must have been like junior or senior in high school. And something weird happened when I picked up the bass. It felt like a language I could speak. It felt like I could play this instrument. And so I pretty much at that moment I became a bass player. And so we had a cover band, we played a lot of Van Halen songs and stuff like that. And then when grunge came out, it kind of infected what we played. And by the time I was a senior in high school, music had completely switched from Van Halen to Nirvana and Soundgarden, and it happened within the space of a year during my senior year. And so, So that kind of was my thing. And then, when I started to go to college, I wanted to apply to Tulane because that was like the holy grail of colleges here in New Orleans. And they wouldn't accept me because I wasn't a good enough student. And I think retrospectively, I probably couldn't have afforded to go there either if they had accepted me. So then, Loyola was right next door. They had a robust music program. And I still wasn't even thinking that I wanted to make music my career. It was just something I did that I enjoyed doing. And Loyola wouldn't accept me. And so I went to UNO, which was kind of it's a state school. And fortunately for me, the director of the jazz studies program there was Ellis Marcellus, and they had all these heavy musicians who were studying there. And that kind of opened up a new dimension of music for me of like, there's more to this. And I was paying my way. A friend of mine had helped me get a job doing the PA systems on campus for the different events that they would have, because like I said, I was kind of technically minded, and it was like a way to be around music when I wasn't playing. And I think really the discomfort with the educators then was that I was this kind of heavy metal kid from the suburbs trying to play a little more heady jazz without the pedigree, without the education to back it up. And so they started me on that education. And that's the great thing about jazz, is you can begin at the beginning and learn all of the things about jazz. But I just had so much to learn to be on par with my colleagues that it felt overwhelming to me. And I'm sure it felt overwhelming to my teachers. And that's when Ellis kind of pulled me to the side and he said, I would suggest that your skill with the microphone might be on par with someone else's skill on a saxophone, and maybe that's worth exploring. And that really set my course,
Yeah, powerful thing to say, and
Totally.
powerful guy to say it too.
But like, it was heartbreaking and empowering in the same sentence. It was like the beginning of the sentence broke my heart, and then the end of the sentence basically, ordained my career.
Yeah, that's crazy. So, I mean, okay, so you go through the motions, you play in some bands, stuff like that. You mentioned that you got interested in recording. Now I'm going to take a massive step, I'm sure, because you eventually land up with a very, very famous, or I suppose infamous, I don't know, it depends on who you're talking to, kind of studio called the Music Shed.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, I'm not from here, and that was one of the places I heard about fairly quickly when I did locate down here. So talk us through your decision. A couple things here. Firstly, you mentioned business. The Music Shed was quite a big kind of business. Tell us how that got started and the running of it day to day, and then tell us what eventually led to you deciding to sell the business.
Yeah. Well, so I couldn't properly explain it without rewinding the tape a little bit and starting.
Yeah, you can rewind all you like.
In the late 90s, my same friends who I was in the band with, we all kind of, like I said, we kind of became enamored with recording. And there was a guy who had a recording studio in town that we would first recorded with him. And then, like I said, we kind of fell in love with the other side of the glass, and he kind of started putting us to work and hiring us to do the sessions that he didn't want to do, and teaching us. He was a real mentor to us and a great musician. And he also was, I don't want this to sound disrespectful in any way, because I have a tremendous amount of respect for this guy, but he was penny wise and dollar stupid. So like he would spend tens of thousands of dollars on a microphone, but then not do the maintenance on it. Or he would have this great studio that had no light switch covers, or the toilet wouldn't flush, or, what I mean? It was just these little things. I think the way we thought of it was, there's 1,000 things in this business under $1 that you could fix that would make it more than $1,000 better. And I think that becomes the infection of this idea of, I can do this myself. And so by the end of the 90s, I guess it was maybe mid 90s, 96, a buddy of mine had a building. His family had a building that was sitting empty. And I kind of had become I worked at a music store, so I became savvy enough with the equipment and how things were hooked up. and I'd done a lot of live sound and understood enough about acoustics, and had a mentor who was a super great speaker designer. So he understood acoustics really well. And so we kind of agreed to just throw a bunch of stones in the pot and see if it makes soup. And he had this building. And so we got some carpenters to kind of build some shapes that looked like a recording studio. And we found, an old mixing console and just kind of piecemealed this analog recording studio. This is before Pro Tools, before computers were really trustworthy enough to be in a recording studio. And our first goal was to make great records and to learn how to make records and to accommodate the musicians around town. And we did that. We made some great records and we had fun and we learned a lot. But what I learned about business from that experience is that if you're going to run a business, your first goal has to be to make money, not to become wealthy or extravagant. Your first goal to make money is to make sure that you can keep your doors open tomorrow and that you can sustain your business. And that was the mistake we made with our first studio. It was called Magazine Sound Recording. And we didn't have the goal of sustaining the business. So we didn't get disciplined about how the money worked. And that ultimately led us to kind of fall apart. And I think by 2001, we were bankrupt and the studio had gone away. Some of us moved to LA to go, take our skills to the next level. Some of us got real jobs to pay for our debt and stuff like that. And I kind of was wandering aimlessly. I went to work for a computer repair store because I recognized that computers were starting to take on a lot of the roles in the music business. And so I wanted to learn how computers could apply themselves in the recording studio. And so I made that kind of my effort for the next couple of years. And then when Pro Tools HD came out in 2002, I kind of felt like, okay, I can do this again. It was a similar idea of like, okay, the quality's good enough, the equipment's reliable enough. Let's take another crack at this. And then Hurricane Katrina hit. And so it just kind of decimated any momentum that we were going to get going, And so the Music Shed started off as a rehearsal room right around Hurricane Katrina. And there were some things about it that were built, let's say, less than ideal with the construction. And they asked me to come in and help out with some of the acoustics and just to kind of see if we can make the rehearsal rooms a little more usable. But over time, we started to realize that all these bands in the rehearsal room were asking for a recording studio. And we had a bunch of leftover space in this warehouse. It was a huge 20,000 square foot warehouse. And only about a quarter of it was built out as rehearsal rooms. And so I'm starting to put the pieces together here that, the rehearsal rooms can help pay for the building. And so you don't have to rely on the recording studio to pay for the building. So that was one of the pieces of the puzzle. And that you don't have to market the studio so aggressively if you have this pool of people already in your building playing music and rehearsing. The other thing that worked in our favor was that after Katrina, the big studio in town was a place called Ultrasonic, and they just did all of the work. Like every musician in town worked there, and they didn't reopen after Hurricane Katrina. And so that kind of created an opportunity for us. So I got with the guys who own the Music Shed rehearsal space, and I said, hey, let's partner up and let's build a recording studio. And so that was kind of my contribution to the partnership, was building the recording studio and kind of leveraging both the environment of the city where there was no other recording studio, as well as the building where I had space to build, and the pool of musicians who were already there. And once we kind of got all the pieces in place, it was like pouring gas on the fire. It just exploded with people wanting to record there, and the opportunities that were coming post Katrina. Disney was making a stronghold, in New Orleans, and there was a lot of movie industry stuff. So we started to kind of diversify and get into movie work, voiceovers, just you name it. We said yes to it, and we would just grow and grow to accommodate whatever we could. we did that really from 2004 through Hurricane Katrina, and then I sold my share to my partners in 2014, 2016.
Okay, so it's a big chunk of time.
It was and that's the thing, you look at like the Beatles or Led Zeppelin, they only had 10 years, so you can get a lot done in 10 years.
Yeah, I had that discussion with my wife a few nights ago. We were talking about just like the fact that we're now older than people like Jim Morrison and Kurt Cobain and Jimi Hendrix, that whole 27 club, and you kind of think about how much work some of those guys did. Like you look at Hendrix and they still uncovering recordings that haven't been heard, and you go like, this dude was only famous for 4 years.
Right.
Like, so how much work did he do, or how little sleep didn't he do?
Yeah, right.
Well, so I mean, it's pretty incredible. I was reading all about your credits a little bit before the interview, and I mean, again, I know you and I have had a couple of discussions, so I don't want to sort of sound like a broken record, but like Robert Plant, B.B. King, Herbie Hancock, the Meters, the Revivalists, R.E.M., Harry Connick Jr., it goes on and on and on. Dr. John, obviously, massive one. So here's a bit of a strange question for you. A lot of people suffer from, let's call it stage fright or nerves, and that can obviously be a thing in studio as well. So when meeting your heroes, or at least musicians of this kind of caliber, especially having to work with them, what advice could you offer listeners on trying to kind of keep your head in the game and just, be the best version of yourself, rather than trying to overcompensate because you think you might want to try and impress such a figure?
Yeah, that's a really great question and perspective, because here's the thing. You wouldn't be in that situation if you didn't have something to contribute. So you don't need to impress them. You just got to do your job. You just do what you're there to do and do it well. Because that's what they're going to do. You can't do what they do, and they can't do what you do. So if you concentrate on your part of the job and do it as well as you can, it usually speaks for itself. Now, there's tricks to personalities and stuff like that you get along with some people better than others. Some people are talkative and they like to be around a quiet person. Some people are quiet and they like when there's talkative people around them because, they feel like they don't have to entertain all the time, or whatever reason. There's, it's just like being in a relationship on some level where you're not always looking for a match. You're looking for a mate, like doing a puzzle. It's like a match doesn't make a puzzle. A mate makes a puzzle. And so a lot of times you're looking for a mate when you're in the studio, and is my personality, is my skill set a complement to what these artists need? And you just concentrate on the work that you have to do, and usually the rest takes care of itself. If you do your work and do it well, stay sober, stay focused. I mean, sober is a moving target, but like, you know what I mean? Like you stay sober in the sense that you're focused on the work and you're not distracted by whatever else might be going on around you. And I think that's the most important thing. I think it also helps to have a couple of broken eggs on the kitchen floor where, when I worked at House of Blues in the 90s, I met the guys from Aerosmith, and when Steven Tyler came through the door, I lost my... Can I say shit? I lost.
You can say any shit you like.
Something I don't know what happened. I just fanboyed out, and I was just stammering and and I'm not even like this huge Aerosmith fan. It was just, I was young enough and inexperienced enough, and he was huge and charismatic enough that it was just like, ha, 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 I just totally lost my cool, and security had to pull me away, and it was just not my finest moment.
Oh my goodness. Security actually had to pull you away. That's
their
beautiful.
bodyguards were like, and I worked at House of Blues, so they couldn't exactly throw me out, but it was not my finest moment. And then, it happened again. I mentioned I worked at a computer store, and Trent Reznor had a studio here in town, and I was the biggest Nine Inch Nails fan in the 90s. Like when that first record came out in 91, it consumed my life. Like I was so in love with that Pretty Hate Machine record. And then when he moved to town, it was like, you kind of got a sense that he was in the orbit, but we never crossed paths. And I was working at this computer store, and I kind of was the music software specialist. And at some point, I got called up to the front, and they said, "Hey, there's a guy here who wants to talk about music software." And I walk up, and it's Trent Reznor, and I just completely lost my shit. I was just tongue tied, and it took me a few minutes. And he was actually super gracious, and he was like, "It's cool, take a breath." He had a problem, and I could fix it, but I had, I was tripping over my own shoelaces. So it helps to kind of get those out of your system. And so that when, Robert Plant walks in the room, you're like, "Hey, yeah, let's get to work."
Yeah.
It's
also cool though, because, you can hear just from you telling those stories that music's still important, or at least at that point was very important. And I sometimes feel, and I'm going to sort of stereotype here for a second, but I find that because it's become so easy for people to have home studios, and suddenly everybody on Instagram is a producer, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And sometimes you just don't feel that passion when you're talking about music with some people, and you kind of go "Wait, man, this is your job, and it sounds like you hate it."
Well, it is easy to hate, when you work 100 hours a week at, these terrible sessions that you're doing just to pay the bills. I could totally agree that it gets easy to hate, but the important thing too is, and again, it's concentrate on your job and know what your job was. And this is something, if I could bat the ball right over the net back to you, when you and I first met, you were working at a studio, and your attention to the needs of the client that stood out to me. That was this is a guy who was paying attention to not so much if I needed you for technical things, I could have asked, but it was more about, you were paying attention to my client's comfort, or my artist's comfort. And I think that goes a long way to showing you're passionate, and to showing that you're, empathetic to the responsibility of the recording session. And it's a big responsibility. Terrence Blanchard once told me that when you're doing those big orchestras, it can be something like $16,000 an hour or something like that, with the rate of the studio and the rates of all the musicians. And so if you don't have your act together, and you're not focused on the game, it can cost somebody a lot of money. And so it's one thing to get hung up on how much money is being spent. It's another thing to get hung up on the environment that you're creating for the artist. And I always thought that was something you did well when we worked together, was that you helped me create an environment for my artist that made them comfortable to worry about other things. And I think that is a level of passion that gets lost when people are working in a home studio. Is you're working in a home studio, you're worried about your own comfort. You're not necessarily worried about, how do I create this comfort for my client? And I think that goes a long way to kind of keeping you passionate, because that's going to be different every time. Some artists are going to need you to sneak a little finger of whiskey into a coffee cup so that nobody knows they're drinking. And some artists are going to need you to turn up the lights really bright and, open the windows. And some artists are going to want it pitch black with candles all over the place. And that, keeping it exciting in that way, keeps you from burning out a lot as well. I think, it's a different kind of mind game.
Yeah, totally. And also thanks for the kind words. I appreciate that.
Of course, man.
So, let's flip it on its head for a sec, and it's possibly a little bit of a loaded question, but obviously you've been doing this for, call it 3 decades. What do you think the biggest changes you've seen in the industry have been? And I'm not necessarily talking about the digital world. Obviously we went from analog to digital, and there's that big sort of shift back to analog now, but I'm talking more from a business side, whether you're trying to run a studio, whether you're trying to be a musician, or whether you don't want to do either of those things, but you're just interested in the arts. What do you think the biggest changes to the actual industry have been, away from just digital?
I think, you said business, and so I'll kind of build on that idea of it, is that when I started out, it was... I'm not the most familiar with baseball, but I think it's an apt analogy, where imagine you're playing baseball, and you're trying to rack up as many home runs as possible. And anybody who's watched 5 minutes of baseball realizes you're lucky if you get one home run for the entire game.
Yeah.
And, if you're a player trying to build up your stats and you just want home runs, you got to play a lot of games and you got to have a lot of at-bats and you got to be a really good batter. And back in the day, that's what the music business was, is you were looking for a home run and you pretty much concentrated all your energy on making sure you knocked it out of the park every single time so that your numbers were as high as possible when it came to the number of home runs. And now, because of streaming, because of just the way money flows in the music industry, it's not so many home runs that you have. You're still looking for those, but it's how many at bats, it's how many, outs, how many catches, how many times you made it to first base, how many games you showed up at, whether they're your game or not. It's much more of a granular kind of success now, where it's about building up hundreds of records instead of concentrating on 2 or 3 records that are just out of the ballpark, if that makes sense.
That makes sense.
It's like a number. I'll borrow an analogy from my little brother, he's a biologist and he studies the natural world, and he's incredibly insightful, and he's a phenomenal musician as well. He's far better as a musician than I am, I'll tell you that. But he's pursued a career as a scientist, as a biologist, and he has this analogy of a human mother versus like an insect mother, a spider mother. A human mother takes one baby and raises it for 15, 20, I guess nowadays 30 years. And you're putting all your energy as a mother into one baby. And you hope that this baby is healthy. You hope that this baby is successful and can stand on its own 2 feet, after 15 years of invested energy. And all your effort goes into 1, maybe 2, maybe 3 or 4, 5, 6 babies tops. And it takes a shit ton of energy from you to raise those couple of handful of babies, compared to an insect who lays one egg that has tens of thousands of babies in it. And the second the egg is laid, mom's done. Mom's energy is invested in making the egg and laying it in a safe place. She kind of doesn't even care. Insect mom doesn't even care if that egg hatches. Her work is done. She's on to the next job. Insects don't spend time raising 10,000 babies. And the idea is that when that egg hatches and 10,000 spiders crawl out, it's kind of a creepy image. When those spiders crawl out, if there's some bird that eats up 8,000 of those baby spiders, there's still 2,000 more chances for mom's DNA to go out into the world and succeed. And so I think that's the biggest difference in the music industry nowadays. Back then, you raised one baby and you put all your energy into it, and you put all your hopes and dreams on one band or one baby or one song, and you cultivated it and you put a lot of effort into it. You marketed it, you got it out there, you toured to support it, and you were very precious about 1 or 2 or 10 offerings as a band. And now, as a band or as an artist, you really just have to kind of keep spitting them out, and you can't look back. You have to just keep making music and putting it out there, and you can't get too precious about how hard you work on one song's success. You do your best at every moment, and you move on. And that's the goal, is to make tens of thousands of songs as compared to 1 or 10, if that makes sense. That's probably the biggest difference I see.
Yeah, and I mean, it makes a lot of sense when you consider the way that we distribute music now.
Yeah.
It's like, if you're not putting out stuff every sort of 6 to 8 weeks, the algorithms seem to convince the system that you're no longer there. And if, you don't see a lot of, unless they're really massive artists, you don't really see a lot of people taking 4, 5, 6, 7 years to make an album anymore.
No, and it's true. And I think that's also reflected in how people consume music. It used to be you'd wait a year or 2 or 5 or 6 years. Like Boston only put out 3 records in 18 years or something like that. You would wait, for the record to come out, and then you would consume it over and over and over again. And you'd dive into the album art and, let these worlds of imagination open up just by reading the credits or whatever. And you'd put on headphones and you'd listen to this album over and over. I know so many of my friends in the cassette and CD days when we got our first car and the tape player broke in your car and you have, one copy of the Beastie Boys, Paul's Boutique in your tape deck, and you listen to it, every time you got in the car for years because your tape deck was broken and that was the only tape stuck in it or something like that. I don't think that happens so much the same way anymore. I think you might have a dozen records in your life that you listen to. If you're lucky, you might have 50 or 100 records in your life that you listen to more than 100 times. But by and large, the rest of the music that we consume nowadays, especially younger folks than myself, I think they tend to consume it like, individually wrapped pieces of cheese and you move on. You just, it's
completely.
Like you just kind of, you consume and you spit it out and you move on. It's not like this precious thing that you hold on to and you live over and over again, and it's tied to a time in your life, that you recall your first kiss when this song was playing or something like that. And, and so I think that also feeds into this idea of how you create, is that you just have to keep creating shit tons of music. It doesn't mean necessarily that the music is less quality or less powerful. It's just you're not as precious about how in depth you go into its creation, or its cultivation is probably a better way of putting it. And it's more about just getting a ton of product out there, like you said, so the algorithm doesn't forget you exist, or your audience doesn't forget you exist. And maybe you got 1 or 2 songs that you really are passionate about, and you keep cultivating those in the background so that when you finish them, you put them out and they might stand above the others, but you do have to kind of keep a constant presence as far as that goes.
Yeah. And it's interesting, just to kind of piggyback off your kind of answer there. There's kind of beauty and kind of, I suppose, dismal, depressing thoughts to both sort of ways of looking at it, because for me, I've always been an album guy. It's because of how I grew up. You listen to the album, and I too found myself in situations where hypothetically the CD player got stuck and you could never get your CD out
Totally.
or whatever it was. But it's funny because I still think some artists, and it's fewer than many, but I still think some try and create albums as a work, so that it's like put in an order that you're supposed to listen from start to finish and you get this experience. And I was talking to some teenagers the other day, and I flat out asked them, I wasn't trying to be a jerk or anything, I was asking them about music. We were talking about music. And not one of them have ever bought an album.
Right.
Not one of them had ever listened to a full album. And it's like, I get it. And you got to move with the times. I totally get it. But in a way, I do think that's kind of sad, because there are some records that are so, just known for, man, you put that album on from start to finish with headphones and you're going to experience something
Totally
in the form of art that you won't experience with just playing a 2-minute single on a playlist,
Totally. And
hey,
historically,
digress,
it's like that. It was, you started off, historically, it was all about the singles. And then there may have been something about the technology that could convey 10 songs at one time. There's also some thought that when the Copyright Office said you can submit up to 10 songs or so many at a time, that kind of birthed the album. But, I think for a long time, the dosage of music was a single in a jukebox. And then for a long time, the dosage of music became an album. And now it's moving back towards, these single serving, 1 song dosages of music. And I'm with you, man. I'm an album guy. I love that arc. I love where it takes me. I think that's the statement of music. I think that is a proper dosage of music as an album, and I think, I still work to cultivate that as one of my skills, and I know you do as well. Like you just, thinking in terms of the breadth of the statement, and I think that's important. It's not something we want to go away, for sure.
Yeah, and talking to my manager a few weeks ago as well, because obviously I put out this release, and we were talking about how to kind of go about it, and I had pitched the idea of, well, the whole world seems to be working on singles. Why don't we just split it into like however many singles we think we can get, and we release it like that? And he's really prominent. He's got some heavy hitters on his books and stuff like that. And he was adamant that no, you got to still put it out as an album, because the music industry still works on album modules, which that surprises me, because I'm not saying it doesn't. It obviously does. The guy knows what he's talking about. But it's interesting because when you look at the average listener, the average consumer, no one's listening to full albums anymore, Anyway, whatever, that's a whole nother topic. Let's get back to you. So I know you work a lot in visual media now.
Yep.
And ironically, even though you said you couldn't get in Tulane, I know you work there as a lecturer. So that is super cool. What a full circle moment. That's awesome.
Yeah, that was the thing.
Tell us a little bit about your teaching role, and tell us what you think, if any, it's maybe taught you in relation to bring it back to music, or at least a career in music. Like what have you learned in that role that you could make insightful for musicians or people listening to this that might be involved in music?
That's a good way of putting it. I would say the irony of my position is kind of the key to understanding what I would share in that regard. And it's that, I wasn't accepted to Tulane as a good enough student, and here I am now, one of their professors without a degree. Like when I called my folks and told them that I was going to go teach at Tulane, my dad's first response was, "They know you don't have a degree, right?" And it was like, "Oh, thanks for the vote of confidence, Pop."
Amazing.
And he's a super supportive dude, but it was pretty funny to hear that juxtaposition, because it does feel, it does invite a lot of imposter syndrome or whatever, but you realize, what are they teaching you in college except preparation for the real world? And, it's like the old joke about what's the difference between theory and practice. In theory, there is no difference. But the reality is, if somebody hadn't gone and done these things, nobody would know what works and what doesn't. And I was thinking about that when you were talking about your manager saying, no, the industry still, thinks in terms of albums. Who else would have that insight but somebody who is in the industry? And so that was kind of the key when I left into the music shed and I sold my shares to my partners, and just kind of, I actually started a greenhouse company. I was growing trees. My brother's master's degree is based on coastal restoration. And so I decided I wanted to get away from the music business, and I knew enough about how business worked that I could build a business around what he knew. And then on top of that, the result was going to be something that benefits the Louisiana coast and the people. And I realized that was an important step. Is you got to work on something that you believe in. You got to work on something that you believe has a purpose. And it's Maslow's hierarchy of needs. You have a roof over your head. Do you have food to eat? Do you have somebody who loves you? Do you do something that you are proud of? And I think you have to kind of first be proud of the work you're doing. And the music industry, it's dangerous because so much of the pride of the work that you do can be tied to success. And the music industry and arts in general is one of those places where you have to let go of this idea that success or making money is success. It's no, like, you can exist just to make art. Unfortunately, like Maslow said, you have to have a roof over your head, and you have to have food to eat, and you have to kind of support the people who love you and you love. But that's the reason to create art is as fundamental as existence. And it's easy to conflate that with, I have to make money. And if you can extract the idea that making money is the fundamental goal of sustaining you as an artist, it becomes a little bit easier. It becomes a little bit less dirty of a job to make money. And so you look at your life and you realize you don't need a lot in order to work on the things you're passionate about and that you can be proud of. And so the one of the pieces of advice when a student comes to me or a young person comes to me and says, how do I make it in the music industry? Or how, I'm a musician. How do I get from A to B? My first question is, do you have any other choice? And it's almost like a forced reckoning of, if you have any other choice, then go and do that. Go have a day job and let music become something that's just passionate, that flourishes because you care about it and you don't have to sustain yourself off of it. Conversely, if you have no other choice and you have to be a musician, then there are some basic things you have to understand about how the music industry works. You have to understand copyright. You have to understand how deals work, how, the win-win of a contract or an agreement. You have to understand some business dynamics and some personal dynamics in order that you can sustain your career. It's critical to understand that so that you can do it again tomorrow. Because if you have this insane talent and you this is who you are, and you're gonna, drive off the road and tie your shoes wrong if you don't play music, you're gonna find yourself in a nightmare if you get into debt and you have to go work at McDonald's to pay off your debt, and you're flipping burgers instead of making music. And conversely, if you know that I can be other things besides music, flipping burgers is a great way to sustain your time and your income, so that the time you're not flipping burgers, you're free 100% to concentrate on your music. And that's the goal, is you want to free up your concentration so that you can make your art, you can make your statement. And I think that's probably the biggest thing that I have to offer people is, I can't tell you where to walk, but I can tell you I found danger when I walked over here. And you can walk where you want, but I can tell you it's fucking dangerous to walk right here. And it's dangerous to try to live your life only with the goal of, making success off of such a fleeting thing as art or whatever. It's a little bit more responsible to cover your bases, make sure you have your shit together, and then concentrate on your art. Because as you develop your art, what's the thing about the 10,000 hours? As you put your 10,000 hours in, you'll get better to a point where then you can flip and it will sustain you. Or you'll have some, what do they call it? A fiduciary event where boom, you get a payday and you never have to worry about flipping burgers again. You can concentrate 100% on your art. But that's really the key piece, is there's no shame in either path. You have to learn what's right for you. And for me as an educator, I can show you where I found danger, and I can give you some advice about what you might find on the road. But my experience is what I'm sharing. And that's what I think Tulane saw when they asked me to, to make this class. There was a guy, he was a mentor of mine, and he's a philanthropist, and he passed a few years ago. But he was a heavy dude as far as like a guy who made a ton of money and really made every effort to use it for the right reasons instead of just like obscene wealth, which, make no mistake, the dude participated in obscene wealth, but he was a really motivated philanthropist. And he actually funded my class with the Trombone Shorty Foundation. And it was through his suggestion, and it was a couple other folks that made Tulane aware of what I was doing with high school kids. And Tulane basically asked, "Can you do this with college kids?" And I said, I'll do my best, and here I am 10 years later, still doing it.
Yeah, it's amazing, man. I'm a big believer in like just sort of trying to give not unwanted, but just try and share the knowledge you have. I find, especially in sort of vocations like music, so many people are so scared to share.
Yeah.
Like, oh, I figured this out. I'm not going to tell that guy how I did it. It's like, it's always been weird to me. I think it's a trait I definitely picked up from my dad. My dad had his own business from as young as I can remember.
Uh-huh.
And I always remember people sitting there and asking for his advice. He would just give them the advice.
Yeah.
And, I think the attitude, and I've definitely got the same attitude, was more anyone can have the advice, because advice is nothing. It's what you do with the
That's right.
advice that affects your life,
Yeah, it's the analogy of like a candle's not diminished by lighting other candles. Like you don't,
Exactly.
you're not wasting a
Exactly.
candle by lighting more candles with it. You're just making more light. What the hell?
I love that. That's a great little quote. Well, my next question was going to be, you and I, we sort of ran into each other a little while ago, and we were at a club gig, and we talked a little bit about balance and life balance and stuff like that. But I think you might have covered some of this already. I was going to ask, what would your top 3 tips for up and coming bands be to try and expose their music to the masses more? But I think, rather than us go down that road, unless you feel like you've got something that you just must add, I think we're going to just revert back to your previous thing, because it really was quite insightful. And I think I'd rather respect your time and move on to the next one. So how you feeling? Can I go on?
Man, whatever. You're in charge, bro. This is I'm a guest in your house, so you tell me where you want to go. And I'm grateful to be here.
Bands is advice for bands is always great, but again, I think the one thing that I would really advise musicians to sort of harp on from your previous sort of conversation part was, for me, and I'm not trying to hijack your answer here, but
Sure.
for me, I think finding a balance so that you can literally find balance with the arts is the way to go. And you can do it in music vocations too. I know guys who will play in cover bands to finance the art side of their
Absolutely,
music lives.
yeah. Some of the most lucrative work is in cover bands, for sure.
Yeah, and I think same thing. I know guys who run like home production studios to finance their own art and stuff like that. The part that I sort of see people fall into the trap of a lot is I see a lot of people go, hypothetically, like let's take the bourbon scene, right? And I'm stereotyping here, but I think a lot of people have this goal that, hey, I'm going to do this art. And to finance this art, I'm going to get this residency on these days on Bourbon Street, and I'm just using that as an example, and these days on Frenchman Street to finance my art. And before you know it, they're doing residencies 7, 8, 9 times a week, and they aren't focusing on their own art. Right. And I've noticed that a lot down here, so I think really you covered a really important thing that I've been wanting to talk about on this podcast for a while. It's just finding a balance between what's paying your bills, because we all have to live, and then still having the time to pay that mental side of yourself that needs to create. I think it's excellent advice.
Yeah, and I think to build on that, there's coming up in the 90s, it was pretty harsh. People did not give themselves or other people much room to accommodate their mental and emotional states. You had to suck it up, or you don't have what it takes, or if you can't stand the heat, get out of the kitchen. If you needed a break or something like that. And there was this expectation that you were going to literally sacrifice your body on the altar of music just to have a career, much less to be successful. And nowadays, I notice this in my students, and I'm so grateful for it now, because as I get older, you require more self-care just because your body is starting to get older. But I think you have a more sustainable career if you can listen to yourself and listen to your body and say, I need to take a mental health day. And, I need a physical day where I can let my body recoup from the rigors of touring or being on stage. And, that's a lot more acceptable nowadays to people to be able to say, I have to bow out. Whereas, when I was coming up, it felt like a lot of times folks would be like, "What? You're bowing out? How dare you? We have to go drinking, or we have to go," and so, and that kind of builds on the advice that I would give to a band trying to get their music out there. Is there's a social aspect that I think you have to maintain. And in New Orleans, there's a scene of going out and drinking and going and seeing other people's bands and stuff like that. And it makes a difference when you go play a show with a band and you sit there and you watch the other bands. It's like we all have to support each other, and that grows. Like, talk about going viral, is go and meet people, go and talk to people, go and and sometimes that's not how you recharge. Sometimes you need to have alone time in the woods and not listen to anything but the birds and the wind and the trees. And that's fine. If that's your thing, go and do it. But some people recharge from being around other people. And that's a great way to get word out about your music, is just go be on the scene and go and show yourself. So even if you're the kind of person who wants to go in the woods and disappear, make some time to go and meet people and to go see other bands, because that goes a long way with getting more gigs and getting people to pay attention to who you are. It's why politicians go on tour. They want to have that FaceTime so that when you go to vote, you go, "Oh yeah, I met that guy," and so, I think those two things kind of go hand in hand. Is like, you have to know yourself well enough to know, okay, I can go play these gigs until I'm exhausted. Then I have to take time to write, or to do some self-care, do some yoga, or go get, a massage, or whatever your thing is. And then, on the nights that I'm not playing, I'm going to go and see a band. And so it's like becomes this, I mean, it's a weird way of thinking of that as a balance, but it can be done, and it definitely is fruitful. And ironically, your two questions kind of merge, where how can I expand the visibility of my band? It actually ties into your ability to take care of yourself, and people want to be connected to someone who is relaxed and calm, and people don't want to be around somebody who's frantic and exhausted. So take your time, take care of yourself, and meet people, and people will see that you're a comfortable and well-rounded person, and they'll want to participate in that. It's a weird connection to make, but I truly believe that they're tied together. Taking care of yourself and meeting people and being confident when you meet people is a great way to expand how people talk about you, and how people are making how you make yourself available is how people accept you and your music. And I think that's a critical part of self-care as well as promotion. It's a weird thing, because a lot of my generation, and I'm hijacking my own thread here, but like, a lot of my generation has a self-consciousness about promoting themselves. You feel weird promoting yourself, especially post-grunge. Like, you'd never see Kurt Cobain comfortable with saying, "Hey, we got a new album out. Make sure you come and check it out." Yeah. That's critical nowadays, and so to be this kind of brooding in your head artist isn't really functional. Whereas, back in the day, in the 90s, it was cool to be this disaffected, unconnected thing. But the dirty secret was those dudes had $1 million marketing machines working behind them in the background. And we don't have that these days. So we have to be that marketing machine for ourselves. And you can't do that if you're exhausted or strung out or wasted or any. You have to kind of keep your head together, and some self-promotion comes from that, I think.
Yeah, no, I think you're spot on. Chris, I want to respect your time, so I've got 2 more questions for you, okay?
Yeah, man.
The first one's a little interesting, possibly. You've obviously, you've reached the heights of winning a couple Grammys, which is something that, a lot of people dream of and never achieve.
Yeah.
So firstly, congratulations.
Thanks.
Secondly, a bit of a weird one, but what did winning these awards mean for you? And I know that you're part of like I think it's called the Grammy board or something like that. Um, what advice could you give like musicians who, and I'm not necessarily talking about musicians who are doing their first gig and about to record a demo or something, but like musicians who have interest, or artists who have interest of trying to get noticed by the Grammy board. What should these artists be doing?
So that's kind of a similar thing. Like it's so the first thing to know about the Grammys, the Recording Academy, is the group that presents the Grammys. And what the Recording Academy is a professional organization. So if we were dentists, we would belong to the ADA, the American Dental Association. And every few months or every year we'd go to the big dental convention and we'd meet other dentists and you talk about the best practices. Oh, did you know that you can pull out a tooth with a pair of pliers? Oh, I didn't know that. Did you know that you can use Novocaine and the patient won't feel it? Oh my goodness, that's revolutionary. You share these ideas back and forth and it makes your game better because you've talked shop with some of the folks doing it. It networks you, it helps you connect, like one of my best friends is an engineer in St. Louis, and we connected on a lot of these Grammy events, and we give each other advice all the time, and we work in completely different genres, and we have completely different past experiences, but our access to each other, I think, helps us both. Round out some of the things that we wouldn't necessarily know or have access to in our own little world. And same thing with going to New York or LA, you meet these people and I've had insane experiences when I'd go to the producers and engineers meetings and I'm sitting at the table and there's Phil Ramone across from me and all the heroes, the people I try to emulate. And, I'm watching, Leslie Ann Jones have a conversation with Al Schmidt, and at first you're looking at him, you're like, talk about rock stars and getting starstruck. But then within a few minutes, they're coming over and talking to you, and they want to know. And Al Schmidt has recorded Dr. John a lot, and he wants to know about how's Mac doing and how much fun did you have recording him? And he wanted to ask me all kinds. He knew my work because he had worked with Dr. John. And it was like, I was blessed enough to strike up a friendship with the great Al Schmidt, probably the most successful recording engineer of all time. And it comes from these networking events. And, we never really talked shop. It was more about talking about just the life and the friendships that we've made in the business. I remember hearing Tom Dowd in an interview one time saying, more valuable than the records he made with Aretha Franklin was the fact that he gets a Christmas card from Aretha Franklin every year. And, it's like these friendships that you make. And so the same way you're in a professional organization, for dentists, you'd be in a professional organization for the Grammys. And so if you're in college, you can join what they call Grammy U, and it's super cheap dues to pay, and it lasts for your whole 4 years of college. But what happens is you get invited to all these events and you get to meet people, and they do networking events or demonstrations and stuff like that of new equipment and techniques and stuff like that, or copyright forums where you can learn more about copyright from lawyers who are making these deals. And then as you get out of college, you can actually join the Recording Academy directly. And if you make records, you can be nominated to join the Academy by someone else who's already in the Academy. So there's a process to everybody who's already in the voting segment of the Academy can nominate a couple of people a year to join. But if you don't make records, say you're just an attorney or a manager, you can apply and become an associate member. You don't even have to be sponsored by someone who's already in. You can just apply, you pay your dues, and you get invited to all these events. Each chapter, there's 15 chapters around the country, and New Orleans falls under the Memphis chapter. So we're connected to all the folks throughout, Mississippi, the western part of Tennessee, Arkansas, all the way over to St. Louis and Shreveport and Texas and stuff like that. Now, as you start to get to Texas, there's the Dallas chapter, and as you get farther east, there's the Atlanta chapter. But you can really choose what chapter you're in to kind of influence what events you're invited to, and they have a ton of events. It's not like they're collecting dues and just stacking a whole bunch of money. They're throwing parties and they're putting on concerts and they're inviting people to come to sound check. And, like I said, it's just this huge networking opportunity. And it goes a long way to helping people know who you are and know the work that you're doing. And I think that also helps with, when you make great records. That's the thing about the Grammys is it gets a lot of criticism as like, oh, it's just a bunch of old white dudes patting each other on the back. And it may have been at one point, but the Recording Academy I participate in is incredibly diverse, is incredibly progressive, and it is, with the exception of about 5 awards at the very top, like, Best New Artist, Album of the Year, those tend to be a little more political. But the remaining 75 categories, I promise you, I give you my word, those are all based on merit. Those are voted on by people who are actually making records and know the difference between a good record and a shit record. And they are nominating them, they're listening to them, they're voting on them, and the winners of the lower 75 or so categories are absolutely the merit of the quality of that record. The top 5, they have a TV show to put out. They have I think there's some politics involved with that, and I don't know that that's a bad thing, because that's kind of the welcome mat to how the public perceives it, but I can also see how it invites some criticism, because, it's like, well, how did Metallica win the Grammy over, or how did Jethro Tull win the Grammy over Metallica, or whatever, it's like, but, aside from that, it's an amazing thing to participate in. And to clarify, I was a chapter governor for 4 years. I don't do it anymore. Since my son's been born, I've kind of dedicated my extra time to him. But now that he's getting older, now that he's getting older, I definitely have more time, and I'm excited to get back involved with participating in the board and stuff like that. The other things that I've done is I've been on steering committees for the producers and engineers wing, where we would compile all the, like, one of the things I worked on was all the information that goes into the Dolby Atmos standard. And it's not necessarily like what Dolby is. I should say immersive music, like immersive audio. So you become educated on these technologies, and then as someone who makes records and someone who is technically oriented like an engineer with the experience that you have, you make a contribution in these forums of what could be the best practices. And so in my time with the producers and engineers wing, I think I've participated in 3 committees. I'm not 100% sure on exactly how many, but I've participated in a few committees where you're making recommendations about what's the best way to embed metadata into a file. The public doesn't necessarily know, and who's going to figure it out except the professionals. So we all get together and we reach a quorum on, this is the things we'd like to see in metadata as professionals. And then we publish that. And again, it's not like we're telling you what to do, but we're sharing the knowledge of all this incredible experience. The Ed Cherneys of the world and the Sylvia Massey's of the world are making a contribution. The Linda Perrys and the Maureen Droneys are all making a contribution to, what's useful in the recording studio. And then we publish it. And then if you have a question as a up and coming engineer, you can refer to this document and learn about the best practices and incorporate them. What's the best way to make an archive or a backup so that your shit's not going to get lost if there's a hurricane or a fire? And it's just,
that's amazing.
Yeah, it's incredibly practical stuff that's born out of this idea of a bunch of professionals getting together and talking shop and having dinner and having drinks and talking and, getting to know each other. And I can't say enough about the Grammys. I truly love being a member of the Academy, participating in the Academy. And as far as winning a Grammy goes, the main thing it does is it makes you realize you're not making records in isolation. The whole world is listening to your record, or I better say, the whole world has the potential to be listening to your records. And the fact that somebody like Rebirth Brass Band wins a Grammy, it was mind blowing to me, because the same year I was nominated for Harry Connick Jr. and I thought, Harry's got the quality and Harry's got the high profile and stuff like that. And when Harry didn't win, but Rebirth won, it was like, wait a minute, people are listening to the Rebirth Brass Band too, and you think that's just something we do here in New Orleans. That's not something that's worldwide. And oh no, it's very much worldwide,
It's amazing. It's absolutely amazing. Chris, I'm going to finish with a heavy hitter over here.
Okay.
What do you think has been the best piece of advice you've ever received? Now, that can be either in relation to your music career, or because you are quite business-minded, we can put that into a business aspect too. It's totally up to you. But
wow.
Best advice you've ever received. So you can take a second to think about it if you need to.
Yeah.
We'll finish on that one.
I might have to. Wow. Geez.
I really should start telling people about that. Time to think about it, because my response seems to be the same every time.
Holy shit, dude. Yeah, that's a good one, because here's the thing. Like, when we were talking about teaching, I was thinking about this too, like paying it forward, or this idea of building a longer table instead of a taller fence. I think what happens is you learn stuff, you get great advice over the years, you ignore some of it, you take some of it, but by and large, when you realize that it was good advice, you often can't pay back the person who gave it to you. And so there becomes this responsibility to pay it forward. Like you have to, like the dudes who taught me are dead, straight up, The majority of the folks that I count as mentors and teachers and who taught me the fundamentals and gave me the tools are all gone. And so the only way I can honor what they gave me and to say thank you to them is to pass it on and to be that for somebody else. And I know not everybody feels that responsibility, and I don't think anybody should have that obligation. But for me personally, that's the way I feel about it. Is I absolutely feel a responsibility to pass forward what I've learned and to share it, like the candle thing we were talking about, and so in that regard, the best piece of advice I've ever gotten, I guess, goes back to for the business standpoint. And I guess I'm dodging your question. But like, I think that from the business standpoint, it goes back to that idea of don't work to amass a ton of money so much as to work to sustain your career. Learn how finance and economy works in such a way that it helps you sustain what you're doing, which then frees you of the responsibility of feeling like a loser for having a job when you could be working on your music. It's like, no, man, that's the winners, is the people who take the job so that they can work on their music. That's not a loser move at all. Break that stigma for sure. Worry about sustaining more than amassing, number one. I would also say, there's a ton of advice that, like, honesty. If you're a record producer, you're not helping anybody by not being honest with them. If you're a musician, especially somebody like jazz or something like that, your authenticity, I would say to that end, the best piece of advice I've ever gotten is that you can't bullshit the universe. So don't bullshit yourself. Like, eventually you will get called out for bullshit. So there's just no need to bullshit. This fake it till you make it shit, that is a load of crap, man. Like, be who you are, balls to bones and ovaries to eyeballs. Just be who you are and and the world will love you for it. The world will accept you for it. And it's, the Oscar Wilde thing about don't be somebody else. That's already been taken. Like, be the first you instead of the next Eddie Van Halen, like be the first you. And so I think authenticity as far as like your creative process and honesty, don't try to bullshit the universe. Don't bullshit. Humans are exceptional at bullshitting themselves. And it's one of our survival traits. It's how we've succeeded as a species. But when it comes to art, yes, I understand the whole game is to bullshit, but it's like, if you can be authentic with your expression of yourself, that makes much more. Every songwriter has ever said it. Like, the songs I write to please other people fall flat, and the songs I write to please myself, everybody puts their hand on my shoulder and says, "You wrote that song about me." It's like, I really believe it, man. And I think, authenticity. Don't try to bullshit anybody up to and including yourself, and don't go into debt. Don't be beholden to somebody else. Be beholden to yourself. Be responsible to yourself. Be somebody that 16-year-old you thinks is cool.
Yeah.
That's
awesome.
And so, yeah, I mean, I guess I kind of bifurcated your question, but that's I would say that's the two biggest pieces of advice I cherish.
No, and they're great pieces of advice. So don't feel that way at all. It's definitely something. I get something from it, and that's what I always say in these things too. It's like there's so many little nuggets in this conversation, man. Like it's actually ridiculous, and not that anyone has to take everything from it, but the way I see it, at least with this podcast, is if a young up and coming musician. And I always say young, I don't mean in terms of age, but if an up-and-coming musician can listen to this and just take one thing away from it, even without giving credit to you or myself or any of the previous guests, that's okay.
Yeah.
Because it's just like, take something, be better, make something great, do something great. Like I'm a big believer in that, so
totally. It's
awesome, man.
Totally. It's like that thing about standing on the shoulders of giants that was stolen from the guy who said standing on the shoulders of giants.
Exactly. Awesome. Chris Finney, thank you so very much, my friend. I truly appreciate it. It was super insightful talking to you. I got tons from it. I'm sure our listeners will too. And let's do it again sometime, dude.
I would be honored, man. I've had a blast. I appreciate what you're doing, and I wish everybody luck, man. This is a really great thing you're doing, and I love to be a part of it.
Thank you, my brother. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Bye.
See ya.
Sweet. Episode 24 done and dusted. I'd like to thank Chris for his time. I'd like to, as usual, thank each and every one of you for your time. Thank you for continuing to listen and support the show. You can support us just by giving us a rating or a review. Share us with your friends. We appreciate it. My name is Travis Mark. I hope that you all keep pushing and just achieve greatness. I believe in you. You should believe in yourself too. Until next time, peace.